Warren Alnibak with To the Point, talking once again about the extension of talks, or excuse me, the termination date for talks on Iran's nuclear program, scheduled for next Monday after a year-long hiatus during which some economic sanctions were released and during which Iran did, in fact, drastically reduce or significantly reduce its nuclear program. Emad Kiyaei is executive director at the American Iranian Council. That's a bipartisan think tank advocating closer ties between the U.S. and Iran. He's also a researcher at Princeton University. He focuses there on Iran and nuclear nonproliferation. Emad Kiyaei, thanks very much for being on our program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We heard at the very end of the first part of our program that there are many other issues that could have an impact on the nuclear talks or that could be impacted by the nuclear talk. Let's talk first about ISIS.
Definitely. I mean, the fight against ISIS has now jumped up on the Washington's foreign policy issue as number one for the region of the Middle East, both for security and stability in Iraq and Syria, but also to stem the rise of extremism in the region. And here it's quite important to then tie back the issue of the fight against ISIS to the role Iran can play, and most constructive role it can play in this fight. But for U.S. and Iran to engage against the fight against ISIS, there needs to be a resolution on the nuclear front that opens up the gate for cooperations on issues of mutual interest, one being ISIS.
Why is Iran interested in, or would it be interested in, cooperating with the United States with regard to ISIS?
It's threefold. First of all, for Iran, the stability of Iraq is paramount to its own security. And therefore, this comes eye to eye to Washington's concerns over the security of Baghdad. So here, they have a mutual interest to work together to stabilize Iraq. Number two, the Takfiri or Salafist movement ideology that underpins ISIS and its rise in the region, it's a Sunni extremist group. And this ideologically goes against the trend of Shia Iran, who sees these Takfiris and Salafist ISIS fighters as the paramount threat to Shia security and population throughout Iraq and Syria. And finally, Iran also wants to see Syria stabilized. And while here there has been a historical disparity between Washington and Tehran's views on the Assad government, I think today, with the rise of ISIS and extremism that is unleashed on Syria, there's closer and closer movement towards finding a middle ground where you can have Syria stabilized and ISIS defeated there as well. And here again, Iran and the U.S. need to work together for this fight. Finally, Warren, it's very important to also acknowledge that the current coalition that the U.S. has gathered against ISIS, its composition is nations in the region who have previously, or till very recently, have supplied, armed, financed groups such as ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria and Iraq. Therefore, if we want a true partner that has shown over and over again its seriousness in fighting extremism, specifically in Syria and Iraq, I think Iran is basically the main player that can really have tangible changes against the fight against ISIS.
Emad Kiyaei, again, Executive Director of the American Iranian Council. Ruel Mark Gorecht is a former CIA Iranian Targets Officer. He was Senior Fellow at the Foundation. He's now Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. That's a conservative think tank focusing on foreign policy and national security. Familiar voice on our program. Good to have you back.